So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and in this video I'm going to be replacing this Insta-Flow water heater. Now this is a Chronomite SR30L/120, and I replaced it with the same exact unit. We're going to go over the installation, why it got replaced, and my experiences with these things as well. So let's get to it. So I took this unit apart after getting it replaced so I could show you guys what happened with this Insta-Flow, and it's the same thing that has happened to the other units that I've had to do over the last 3 or 4 years. You'll notice this little rust crack right here, and that's where it was leaking from, and I think it's just a matter of time before these units just eventually wear out and that happens. So me personally, I'm not too fond of these units because I have had to do 3 or 4 of these things because of those cracking right at that point. Maybe it's the brand, maybe it's just the nature of the beast with these Insta-Flows, but the reliability factor isn't that great, but might be necessary if you only have access to a cold water line and it's easier to get electricity than it is to run a hot water line over to where you're trying to put a sink, etc. So you can see the water that I had on my hand from right underneath where the electrical comes out. I'm going to show you and just touch the bottom of these to show you these are both dry, so it is coming from inside this Insta-Flow. So the first thing you're going to want to do is shut the water off. So under the sink there's going to be some shut-off valves. These are also called angle stops. Most of them have a manual handle you would just twist. Some of them are push-pull in residential applications now, and in the commercial use a lot of times they use a key to shut them down. The ones under this sink were ones that took a key, and it's a 50-50 chance when you tighten those down to shut the water off as to whether they're going to start dripping or not. So it is a good idea to shut these valves off before you go get the Insta-Flow, just in case you do need to get some angle stops as well to finish the job. After you get the water shut off, you might want to let that water drain out of the Insta-Flow for a little bit, because water is a good conductor of electricity. Also, open the knobs to your sink to drain any residual pressure that is in the lines or the Insta-Flow. It's also a great idea to go shut the breaker off before, if it is labeled and you know which one it is, before touching the Insta-Flow. However, if not, you can pull this cover off, and we're going to test it with a voltmeter to find out whether we have voltage or not before doing anything else. So I've said this before, but you can get a multimeter for less than 10 bucks at Harbor Freight, and it just comes in handy if you're doing do-it-yourself projects around the house. So I've got my meter, I've got it set to AC volts, and we're going to put the leads on these studs to check for power. So on any 120, you're going to have 3 legs, a neutral, a ground, and a hot lead. Now these colors can vary depending on who wired it in. Normally your neutral is white, green is ground, or bare wire on ground, and then red or black for your hot. No matter what colors they are, they all test the same. So right here I've got my black lead on the white wire, which is the neutral, and I'm going to test across the hot line and the ground to make sure I do not have any voltage. Once I do that, I'm going to switch my black lead over to the ground and test to the hot wire as well. And therefore I'm testing across all 3 poles and any possibility to make sure I don't have any voltage. So here's a view of my voltmeter before I shut the breaker off, reading 125 volts. Now I'm going to shut the breaker off, and you'll notice it drops down to basically nothing, and therefore we are safe to switch out the Insta-Flow and don't have to worry about being electrocuted. With the power shut off and the water shut off, I went ahead and took the lines loose from the Insta-Flow. You're probably going to need to use 2 wrenches to do this, so you do not loosen the fitting that is in the Insta-Flow. Once you crack them loose, usually they'll come off by hand, or you can just use the 1 wrench to get them the rest of the way off. After I got the nuts fully off of the lines and verifying that the power was off one more time, I went ahead and took a screwdriver and loosened the screws holding the wires to the Insta-Flow. I could not get the wires bent out of the Insta-Flow, so I went ahead and took the 4 screws that were holding it to the wall off. I did have to unscrew that one fitting a little bit more. Took it down. You'll notice all the water that is coming out of the bottom of the Insta-Flow. That is not supposed to be there. Using that flathead screwdriver and what should have been a hammer, but I only had a crescent wrench, I popped the nut loose that holds the electrical to the box and pulled the rest of the wiring out of the Insta-Flow. So after getting the wires pushed back through into the new Insta-Flow, I put the washer and the nut that was originally on it back over the wires, worked it down, and proceeded to tighten it up with a flathead screwdriver and a hammer. Or in my case, a 3/4 inch wrench, because I again did not have a hammer. Once tightening that nut down, I went ahead and hooked the wires back up to the Insta-Flow. It's a good idea to take a picture as you're taking the old ones off so you know exactly which way the new ones go on. The green is the critical and it is the ground and is usually identifiable by the green bolt that holds it in place. Once getting all these tightened down, I usually try and bend the neutral wire and put it to the opposite side of the box as the hot wire. It's just something I do, not really necessary, just to keep those two legs away from each other. And then I went ahead and checked the tightness of all three legs one more time. So once I got the wires hooked up, I hooked up the lines going to the Insta-Flow, and I do that before I mounted it to the wall because it's just easier to get the lines hooked up, especially if they're a hard line. If it's soft lines, then you could go ahead and mount it and then hook the lines up. This Insta-Flow had compression fittings, so you did not need to use any Teflon tape. It could be different depending on your application. After getting both lines started, I went ahead and mounted the Insta-Flow back to the wall, then finished tightening down the two lines using 2 wrenches again so I would not rotate the fittings that were in the Insta-Flow. Once doing that, you're going to want to make sure both knobs are open on the sink so you can bleed the air out. Once those are open, you can slowly turn on your cold water supply and bleed the air out of the system. Once I bled all the air out, I shut the sink off and checked for leaks. I did develop a small drip from a fitting that I didn't even touch that I had to tighten down a little bit. Once verifying I had no leaks, I went ahead and put the cover back on and tightened it down. After bleeding all the air out of the system and checking for leaks, I went ahead and turned my breaker for the Insta-Flow back on at the panel and verified that I had hot water. You will not get hot water if there is too much flow coming out of the sink, so they give you a kit of reduced flow tips to put on your sink, and that will increase the temperature by decreasing the flow and giving the water more time in the Insta-Flow. And that's how easy it is to switch out one of these Insta-Flows. Hope you enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, hit like and subscribe to my channel. The whole purpose of my channel is not to waste your guys' time and give you guys information so you can save some money by doing it yourself. Hope to see you next time. Later.